Touched by Death. An Ashdale prequel novella. Written by G.K. Lund. Dear listener, Touched by Death is set in the same universe as the Ashdale Reaper series and the Ashport Mender series, and introduces the world these series are set in. It contains no spoilers for either of the series, and follows Mercy, a side character in one of the Ashdale Reaper books, as she encounters more trouble than she expects, as she must deal with an unusually tenacious police detective. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1. As Mercy readied herself to kick down the door, she briefly considered disintegrating it instead. With her back against the paint-peeled wall, she scanned the street. There was hardly anyone about, but that didn't mean no one was paying attention. She was dressed not to stand out, but blend in, though even her dark pants, ankle-high shoes, and black field jacket wouldn't protect her against someone noticing. Her red hair, more than anything, would make her memorable. No. She was here to settle something, and drawing the wrong kind of attention from outsiders was not on her agenda. She braced herself and kicked back into the door, sending it flying inward. Her hand was already out to stop it slamming back into the frame before she'd turned herself around. No one moved in the street. No one in this neighborhood cared about doors being kicked down as long as it wasn't their own. Mercy wasted no time as she entered the run-down ramshackle of a house. There was trash and knickknacks strewn everywhere, on and around worn and faded furniture. A sour smell, like wet and musty clothes, blended into the mix as if it wasn't disgusting enough already. "What in the hell?" a gruff, male voice sounded from a nearby room. Mercy changed directions and headed right for him. "Is someone there? This is breaking in, you know." "It sure is," Mercy agreed as she came across the man in the door leading to what looked like a messy den behind him. "You have something that's not yours, Hadwin." The man, a few inches taller than her and about 80 pounds and 25 years ahead of her, startled at the realization she was inside his house. Had he really thought himself safe? He had, hadn't he? Why else would he have committed such a foolish theft? "You!" he blurted, and then immediately backed into the den behind him. Mercy followed, her steps measured as she took in both the man and his surroundings. No one else burst from behind the stained and ripped couch or the piles of empty takeaway boxes that added a different foul smell altogether from before. No. Hadwin was alone. He backed up against the couch, looking forlorn and pathetic in his stained wife-beater, dirty pin-striped suit pants, and to top it off, light blue and fluffy slippers. Normally, Mercy would have laughed. She didn't even crack a smile now. She didn't have it in her anymore. "I don't," Hadwin began as he reached for something behind his couch. "I don't know what you think I did, but I didn't do it. I swear." "Oh, well, if you swear." Mercy shrugged and stopped for a moment in mock belief. Hadwin realized he was over his head and withdrew a metal bat, readying himself in a ridiculous stance. This wasn't a game. "I was hoping you'd do something stupid like that," she said, and stepped closer, calm as ever. It made his eyes dart back and forth as if he couldn't believe her lack of fear. "It allows me to do so many things to you." Hadwin's eyes widened for a moment, then he swung the bat. Mercy ducked without thinking. She twisted sideways on her way back up and was already in a different place than the man expected. Before he could take new aim and swing the bat back, she kicked out straight into his solar plexus. His pot belly didn't protect him from the pain. He doubled over, but Mercy was quicker, her foot connecting with his throat before he bent too far for that. Hadwin gasped in pain as he sank down on one knee, his eyes bulging as he kept his focus on her. The bat slipped from his hand and landed with a thud on the worn-down and once bright green carpet. His wheezing was the only sound in the room as Mercy stepped around him and picked up the bat. "I don't really care much about what you do, Hadwin. You're small time anyway. But this time you robbed the wrong dead woman." "I didn't rob anyone." Hadwin wisely shut up when the end of the bat touched the underside of his chin, forcing him to look up at her despite the pain. "You stole something from Lenore Simmons and I want it back." "Lenore?" Hadwin gasped and was visibly sweating from both pain and strain. "I didn't know. I swear." "I'm afraid I don't believe you." Mercy had seen her friend's body in that dank alley and she had been recognizable. Hadwin had known exactly what he was doing, who he was stealing from. "The thing is, Hadwin, our people are more afraid of me than of you. You were seen going through her pockets before I got there. And I was told. A flash of smoke burst up between them, and Hadwin bolted away. Mercy stepped back and raised her forearm in front of her nose and mouth to avoid inhaling the smoke. She eyed Hadwin as he ran into a kitchen through an open doorway. She raised the bat, aimed, and then sent it after him. She was already walking, stepping through the cloud of smoke, when the man yelped and fell forward as the metal bat hit his legs. She didn't hesitate then, tired of his attempts to escape. She caught up, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and hauled him up. The larger man seemed to let her. He yelped and whimpered as she turned him around and pushed him back against a grimy stove. The yellow filth spread between the burners. "That kind of foolishness won't work with me, Hadwin," she told him as she pressed an elbow against his ribs and gripped his throat with her hand. His was the most pathetic case of pyrokinesis she'd ever come across. He could cause enough of a spark for smoke to fly up, but it was harmless. It did nothing but scare the unsuspecting. "You've heard of me, haven't you?" Mercy went on, tired and impatient. "Heard what I can do? Do you want to end up in nasty little meat pieces all over this stove?" Hadwin's eyes bulged even more out of their sockets at this as he peered down at her hand. "I'm sure it couldn't get filthier, but then again, you're as nasty as they come, aren't you, Hadwin? Please, where is it? You stole money and a locket off a woman who's done nothing but help even the likes of you." You what? That locket belongs to her daughter." "I didn't think she'd need it." Mercy could feel her hand clamping down hard on his throat, a gargled noise escaping him as his whimpers were pushed back by her grip. How she wanted to snuff him out. This filthy thug had touched her dead friend, stolen from her. Mercy had faced so much worse and yet never felt so appalled in her life. The temptation was suddenly overwhelming, but her other gift lay dormant at the moment. No warning of this creep's impending demise rose up in the back of her head. This would not be his last day. "Where is it?" she hissed between her teeth, fighting to control herself. The drawer, up drawer," he squealed as she allowed him some air to answer her. Mercy let go and stepped back as Hadwin lost all sense of pride and fell to the floor, sobbing with relief. When her phone rang, he yelped with fear and pushed his back against the stove, like that would save him. Mercy shook her head as she fished her phone from her pocket and stepped over to the drawer. It was filled with small trinkets and jewelry, all of it likely stolen. She found what she was looking for quick enough, though. A gold locket with pictures of Lenore and her daughter inside. She had carried it with her everywhere, no matter what. Mercy sighed and picked it up. Then she grabbed the wad of cash in there, too. It wasn't about the money, but it would hurt Hadwin. And besides, Lenore's kid could use it. The phone in her hand kept ringing. Hadwin kept sobbing. Mercy slammed the drawer shut and walked away without giving the man a second glance. "Yes, Frank?" she snapped as she answered the call. "Mercy? Glad I caught you. Need your help with something pressing." "Yes. Well, when don't you?" Chapter 2. The Silby factory was an old family business that had been in the city of Ashdale for ages. It was situated in Fairview, a district south of the massive Ashdale River. A large city park, the hospital, and an abundance of office buildings made up most of that area. The Silby factory produced crisp bread and had somehow managed to be profitable ever since one of the Silbys started the venture late in the 19th century. At first, it had been a reasonably priced alternative to bread that could also be stocked longer. These days, it was marketed as a much healthier option to regular bread. The large stone building loomed over Mercy as she took the familiar route inside through a back door in Park Street. She had a key card that allowed her access. If not for the fact that both Lenore and their colleague, if such a word could be used for them, Anselm, had also had access, Frank Silby's assistant would likely have thought Mercy his mistress. As it was, the gray-haired woman nodded and smiled at her as she passed by and entered the CEO's office via a back door. A few minutes later, Mercy found herself seated on a comfortable couch in a spacious office, lined with books on bookcases along the walls. It was a familiar place. "Sorry to call you in on such short notice, Mercy." Frank Silby was seated in a soft chair across the coffee table. It usually took more formal meetings for him to remain behind his large oak desk, or to use the long meeting table on the opposite side of the office. "Must be important, then," she remarked. She was free to take jobs on her own, but sometimes people went through the judge of their area. The judge, Frank in this case, was their leader, chosen by their kind. Whichever was contacted, it usually depended on who they knew best, or if they wanted to keep something quiet. Shame would usually have them come directly to Mercy. The less who knew, the better and all. "Do you know a Jack Maddock?" Frank asked. Mercy arched an eyebrow. "I know of him. Not mother's best, or so I've heard." "That may be so." Frank drummed his fingers on the armrest of his chair for a moment as he thought about this. He was a stout man with graying hair and beard. "Well, I'm just going to come out with it. I've encouraged him on as a new mender." Mercy felt a pang in her chest at those words. She should have expected this. She knew that. She was the last one in this area now, and she knew she couldn't do it all, nor was she immortal. Someone else would have to come along eventually. But Jack Maddock? What would Lenore and Anselm say to that? Nothing now. They were dead and gone, and Mercy was still here. But she had respected her fellow menders, known them for years. They were the enforcers for the community of the supernaturally gifted, the ones who saw to order and helped out when things got out of hand. And now a brat like Jack was supposed to be one of them? "Are you all right?" Frank asked when she didn't say anything. "Perfectly fine." Mercy heard her own strange and hushed voice as if it belonged to someone else. "There's more," Frank went on. "I see potential in the boy, but—" He messed up? I wouldn't go that far, but he could use a guiding hand. That was unheard of. He should learn on his own as the rest of us do. That was how they gained the trust of the communities they served. It's not as easy as that. Jack has a past. "I'll say." Mercy scoffed at the judge's choice of words. Jack had had more than one run-in with the police, which was not encouraged among their kind. "He's kept his mouth shut every time, though," Frank went on. "I think he could do some good if properly motivated." "You could have told me this over the phone. Checking up on me, are you? Think I need a pet to forget about my friends dying?" "I sent Anselm on his last job, Mercy. Please don't talk to me about forgetting any of it." There was silence between them for a moment. He was right, and yet she didn't blame him. This was what they all signed up for. She sank back and straightened the flaps over the pockets on her jacket. "What's the kid's ability anyway? You must have sniffed him out." That was Frank's own talent after all. He could sense the otherworldly abilities in others. "And I'm sure it's not his fists, though he seems to use them often enough." Frank sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I thought you were supposed to find out things on your own." He waved his hand in front of himself as if to shut himself up. Never mind. I gave Jack an easy job, and it was. At first, he messed up. No, this was out of his control, but I think he needs someone. Mercy shifted her position a little. And that's going to be me, is it? Who better? Lenore or Anselm, she immediately thought. They would have been much better. In truth, so would she, had they still been around. She knew it was to be expected. Lenore had barely passed 30, and Anselm had been a couple of years shy of 40. Mercy was smack in the middle. She shouldn't expect even being here anymore. Theirs was not a safe life. She should be happy for the time she'd known them. She was. Of course she was. But she wanted more. She'd have to keep going, though. Quitting wasn't an option. But what Frank was asking was unusual. What happened, then? Frank gave a subconscious, almost imperceptible nod like he thought he had won her over. You know the Faring brothers? Mercy nodded. Caden, at least. He's got some sort of force field, if I remember correctly. Not particularly strong, but handy enough when you need a little pressure to break in somewhere. Well, this concerns his brother Ryder. Seems Caden owed him some money. Mercy groaned, knowing from experience where this was going. And Ryder used his ability on Caden. I doubt he would have killed him. They get along on and off, but the problem was that Caden's uninitiated girlfriend witnessed this spat. Right. So you sent Jack to teach him a lesson? Mercy could see how that would initially have been a good first job for him. Showing their abilities to outsiders was not encouraged, almost to the point of not being allowed. At least not in such a way as Ryder had done it. It caused too many problems and put them all at risk. I did, but then Ryder panicked and fled. Menders do have a reputation, you know. She knew. Even a new one like Jack would benefit from that, or not, as it had turned out now. So, a panicking Faring brother? That was not good. Fine, she said, and stood up. I'll help the kid. Thank you, Mercy. But that's it, though. I will clean up this mess, and then he's on his own. Frank nodded as he arose from his chair to see her to the door. Of course. Chapter 3. Flat and gabled old roofs went by as Mercy followed the instructions on the GPS on her phone. She knew of the area but hadn't been there much before. She was in the eastern part of Harrow, a popular residential district in the city, and close by the river. A lot of the buildings near that large body of water were warehouses that had been more actively in use when the old waterway had been the main thoroughfare for the city's trade. These days, many bars and hotels had popped up there too, but Mercy found herself in a more run-down part where older buildings were being reconstructed or simply used as storage. The blare of sirens had her stop for a moment and look around. Her eyes scanned the area. The river was visible in front of her now, large and seemingly calm. It was known for its dangerous undercurrents, though, and Mercy knew from experience they were not something to take lightly. A few jobs over the years had had her end up in it. The river wasn't what bothered her, though. She turned and saw smoke rising a few streets over. It could be Cinder Street. She also became aware of screaming mixed into the general piercing noise of the sirens. Something had happened, but she doubted any fire would spread this far with so many responders already arriving. She moved on and soon found herself on the roof of an old factory. What they'd produced, she couldn't tell, but the large building seemed to be under repairs, judging by the signs telling people, and especially children, to stay away, even up there. The building itself was a massive stone structure that was so light gray it almost came off as white. One main part was flanked by two sides, reminiscent of wings on old mansions. It was on top of the eastern one of these that she found Jack Maddock as he was surveilling the large middle part of the building. I hear we have a Faring problem, Mercy said, as she hunkered down beside him behind a barrier. Jack didn't startle at her sudden appearance by his side, so he must have heard her coming at some point. She begrudgingly had to give him some credit for that. "Mercy," he said in greeting, and then turned his attention to the factory again. He looked both relieved and annoyed at her presence. He probably didn't want the help, but also knew he needed it. In addition, he seemed a bit wary. Mercy was used to that, though, and Jack hadn't exactly been on the good side of the community. Their kind preferred people who kept out of trouble. It had been ingrained into them all that they needed to stay hidden from the world at large. Bad things tended to happen when the wrong kind of outsiders got wind of people with powers. "So, what have we got?" Jack ran a hand through his short, dark hair as he relayed the information for her. It seemed like a subconscious tic to her. He was clean-shaven and wearing dark trousers, a gray shirt, and a slim, black tie. She didn't know him well, but he always seemed to care about his appearance. He was handsome and likely had some women swooning over him. Mercy judged him to be no more than 22 or 23, merely a baby. But she had to remind herself that it was a normal age to start this mess of a career. Some even started younger. She paid attention as the update Frank hadn't been able to give her spilled from Jack. He'd done what he was supposed to and sought out Ryder. The man had a day off work and had spent it in a bar a few blocks over. Apparently, he lived in the Fairview district, which lay east of Harrow, so these were his stomping grounds. The factory they were sitting atop was his current workplace. He was part of the construction crew, and they were all working on some sped-up schedule, where they'd been painting the interior well into the night. They had to be given some hours off for that. Now the building was deserted for the day, despite the contractor bringing in extra manpower. "And you gathered all that information?" she asked Jack as he had to stop talking to take a breath. The young man eyed her without managing to hide his resentment at her doubt. "Thought it'd be useful to know, didn't I?" Mercy made a small grimace that stated, "Meh," and motioned for him to continue. It was pertinent information, of course, but he shouldn't expect praise handed to him on a platter. This was kids' stuff. When Ryder had seen Jack coming and realized what his new occupation was, he'd bolted, but not before causing a bar brawl. Mercy could see a reddened patch on Jack's left cheekbone to confirm this. He'd probably done all right, though, she figured. Jack was a small-time crook, and he was not unfamiliar with these kinds of skirmishes. "Anyway, I followed him, but he ran straight in there. Figures. He knows the place, right? Feels safe, I bet." "So why are you out here?" "Well, he broke in, right? Must have set off an alarm or something because not 2 minutes later a couple of security guys showed up and entered. They must have been on a round. Not like they're cops, you know, but the judge told me not to reveal myself even to them." Mercy nodded slowly as she stared at the middle building. The kid was inexperienced in this, but at least he hadn't revealed himself. That was something, she supposed. "Cameras?" "None on the inside from the information I gathered. 2 out here in the courtyard, but I took care of them." Mercy turned her attention to him. "How?" Jack shrugged and smiled. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Then his smile faltered as he seemed to remember who he was talking to. Oh yes, Mercy might be 12 or 13 years older, but they both knew she could subdue him if she wanted. She stared at him in silence, but, to his credit, his dark eyes didn't falter. He had some guts then. "How long since they went inside?" "About an hour and a half. That's when I called the judge. He told me to hold off." He was right. I'm sure Ryder has hidden somewhere in there, and the guards are still searching if they haven't come out yet. They haven't. There are alternative exits, but they've been locked and bolted when there's no one around. These places are tempting for many to break into. A lot of expensive equipment inside, I've no doubt. "You would know, wouldn't you?" Mercy said, and didn't care one bit about Jack's reaction as he pressed his lips together. Something like this would be right up his alley. "All right," she went on. "Tell me about—" She stopped talking as Jack drew breath between his teeth. They could still hear the sirens from the fire further away, but as they were about to move, 2 cars came driving around the corner of the opposite wing of the factory, blue and red lights flashing bright even in daylight. "Crap! The cops!" Jack blurted as they both sank down a bit more behind the barrier. "This changes everything," Mercy said, and ignored the clueless look in the eyes of her unwanted partner for the day. "What do we do now?" Jack asked as they stared down into the courtyard. There was only one building between the factory and the river. It was a warehouse that helped frame a rectangular courtyard where 1 plain car and 1 patrol car now stood. At least they'd turned the damn emergency lights off. "The security guards must have called them," Mercy ventured as she, like Jack, peeked over the edge to see. They hadn't used sirens to signal their approach, so they were likely trying not to alert the intruder to their presence. At least no more than necessary. "Oh, damn," Jack uttered, on a roll with his swearing now, as the cops all exited their vehicles. "Old friends?" Mercy asked. She saw 2 uniformed cops, both men, exit the patrol car. One was an older black man, the other younger, and with a tan that mismatched with his platinum blonde hair, so much it looked like he'd fallen asleep on a sunny beach. "They're not my damn friends," Jack snarled, his eyes narrowed at the sight of them. "Just because those assholes, especially her, like to arrest me doesn't mean we sit and drink tea together." Mercy followed his line of sight as he indicated the other car where a plainclothes cop emerged. She looked like any other cop to Mercy. She was dressed in jeans, shirt, and a short leather jacket. There was a badge on her belt, and she had the same arrogant attitude of the men in the uniforms. Her skin had a warm, bronzed hue to it, and she had long and straight dark hair, which she was now twirling into a bun at the nape of her neck while she talked to the others. Mercy and Jack watched as the 3 of them found and put on bulletproof vests. "If she knows you, that's a bad thing." "Any cop knowing you is a bad thing," Jack said with an air that clearly put him as one of their kind. The tone in his voice was not that of a disgruntled criminal blaming their failures on the police. No, this was the distrust and anger of someone affiliated to any supernatural community. There were many who could create problems if they knew about what people like Mercy and Jack could do, but no one could cause as much trouble as suspicious and nosy cops. They always misunderstood and made rash judgments. Their presence here was not good. "Her name's Jones," Jack shared. "Detective Olivia Jones. Never seen the other 2. Don't need to know they're dumbasses, too." Mercy gave a soft, sympathetic scoff. Then she glanced over at the main part of the factory. "Here's the thing, kid. We need to get to Ryder first. He can't be allowed to be arrested. Do you understand me?" She turned her attention on Jack again. "Duh." "No, I'm serious. This isn't child's play. The moment these guys showed up was the moment Ryder's actions became a real threat to the community." Jack glanced down at the cops for a moment before his eyes returned to her, his mind struggling to comprehend what she was saying. "You took this job, kid," she said. "This is what it entails. I thought we were going to, scare him a bit." Mind lock is what he would have suffered for this, at least for a year or so. Jack visibly grimaced at the thought of the mental restraint they put on their own as a severe punishment. What he would have... This guy couldn't control himself in front of his own brother's girlfriend. He's scared mindless of you, of all people, and now the cops are here. What do you think is going to happen, huh? Jack's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Come on, kid. What did you expect?" "Not this." Mercy shook her head in resignation. "No, you didn't, did you?" "Hey, I have no problem with any of it if I think it necessary. The guy's just scared." "So will others be if he starts blurting information about us." Jack was about to argue further, but Mercy held up a hand to stop him. They didn't have time to argue. If we can get to him before this escalates, then the mind lock is sufficient. Let's set our eyes on that first, shall we? Jack nodded. Where's our way in? Ground level. Everything's locked now, even emergency exits. As you can see, the windows up here are too far away from the roof for us to climb. We'd need equipment, which they had no time to get. There are some external fire escapes on the west side, he went on. We can use them since we're outside. That's how I got up here to keep watch. But the windows there are boarded up now. They're only opened up when the crew's here working. All right. You make your way down and inside. I'll find a point of entry up here. Up here? How are you gonna— Never mind that. We need to search the whole damn building without them spotting us. She indicated the cops who were now taking in the large factory building, scanning the walls and roof. Mercy and Jack ducked down to be unseen. If Ryder knows what's best for him, he'll come along quietly. And if not? Mercy sighed. Did Jack need to be fed the consequences of this with a teaspoon? Ryder could not be trusted to stay quiet. Can I count on you or not? You'd best tell me now, kid. Fine. I'll go down and— Whatever Jack's next words were, Mercy lost her focus on them. An alarming sensation demanded her attention, a slight prickling at the back of her neck. For a moment it felt like someone was standing behind her, tickling her or pricking her with needles. Then it intensified and spread into her head like she was tapping into a frequency that couldn't be heard. She shot up a little, looking around. Hey, what the— Jack said, but she pushed him back down behind the barrier. Shh! She ducked herself. Someone is about to die and I have no idea who. The buzzing in her head became relentless. She'd always been able to sense the spirits that came when someone died. She'd never been able to actually see them reap people's souls, though. She wasn't really sure she wanted to. Jack shot her a curious look. What? How the hell would you know? Mercy didn't answer him, simply hoped there wasn't a sniper on the roof, not that she could see why there would be. A loud yell from somewhere had Jack pop his head back up. Crap! He exclaimed, and Mercy followed suit, looking in the same direction as him. There was movement inside and near a window, and she had no trouble seeing the scuffling going on the top floor. 2 men were fighting, and Mercy knew, by the warning she could sense, that one of them would not survive this. Sure enough, mere seconds later, the one who was pushed against the window crashed through it and fell to the ground. Mercy didn't hear a sound except for the cops who started yelling as a body smashed down right in front of them. Holy hell! Jack blurted, still on his way through his swearing vocabulary. Mercy realized the sensation in her head was gone. That meant the fallen man was gone too, as was the spirit who'd reaped his soul. She stared down and felt no surprise there. The man lay sprawled on the hard ground, arms and legs in odd angles, blood spattered around him. He hadn't stood a chance. How the— Jack shook his head in shock, and Mercy couldn't blame him. They were in deep trouble now. Chapter 4. How did you know? Jack asked, eyes wide as they darted between the dead body below and Mercy next to him. The same way I always do. You're a seer? I thought you had some kind of explosive gift? I'm not a seer and I'm not explosive. Mercy pursed her lips as she considered the frenzied cops in the courtyard. No, she wasn't psychic, and considering what she saw was not up for interpretation, she kind of wished she was instead. Her death warnings were her least favorite ability, a gift from her mother's side of the family and one she could do without. When she sensed it, there was no changing it. The outcome was always set. The ability was rare and seemed to make people a bit uncomfortable. No wonder. Not a seer? Then— Oh, wow. You get death warnings? I've heard of that. Cool. Apparently, Jack hadn't gotten the memo on being uncomfortable. "No, kid, not cool. Disturbing is more like it." There was a reason Mercy stayed away from the hospital if she could avoid it. The tone of her voice made Jack drop it at least. They had other things to worry about. Mercy retrieved a small pair of binoculars from one of her jacket pockets to get a better look at the body. "What matters is what Ryder's ability is, not mine." Sure. The judge didn't tell you?" "Frank only knows it's a sort of kinesis. He doesn't know everything about everyone, you know." "Yeah, sure." Jack sounded a bit surprised, as if that was exactly what he had thought. "Hydrokinesis." Mercy nodded as the dead body came into focus through the binoculars. Hydrokinesis. So the man could draw upon the humidity of the air around him, or bodies of water, and manipulate it to do as he wanted. Is he strong? Strong enough to almost drown his own brother while the guy's girlfriend watched. Mercy drew a deep and steady breath as the twisted and broken body of the security guard emerged. There was blood spatter around him on the ground, dark and glinting in the light as it was wet. One officer's foot blocked her view for a moment before he moved and she saw the dead man's head. It had cracked open on the ground and she tried to overlook what else lay blended with the blood there. But something else drew her interest. It was hard to distinguish for certain when it came to the man's skin, but his hair. "His hair's wet," she told Jack. "Blood?" "Not the front of his head. That's from water." "Ryder drowned the guy?" "Looks like it. And then pushed him through the window. Must have been one hell of a fight. No wonder he didn't scream on the way down." Jack leaned back from the edge. "Oh, freaking hell. Language, kid. Now, we have to get inside while they're distracted. Ready?" Yeah. "Good to hear you sounding so certain. Let's go." She gave Jack a slap of encouragement on his shoulder and began moving. She could hear him follow along, and as soon as they reached the main building, they separated as he went toward the western wing to climb down. Mercy went to the side opposite the courtyard where the cops couldn't see her and took in her surroundings. As she looked down, she could see several windows below, and Jack was right. They were too far down and with nothing near them to hold on to. Still, she knew there were rooms below her. She didn't want to risk entering some sort of high-ceilinged production hall with too far a drop. She glanced around, saw no one, and then sat down on the flat roof, on her knees. Explosive? The word made her shake her head. Funny the rumors that got around sometimes. No, she didn't have any kind of ability that caused explosions, but she had always considered it useful nonetheless. Being double-gifted was as rare as getting death warnings, so in a sense, she was an anomaly. Usually, people only inherited one ability from a parent. Mercy, however, also took after her father. She pressed her hands to the cool surface of the roof and focused. Usually, if she only aimed for a small object that was no more than 6 feet away, she didn't have to touch it. A job like this, though, required more strength, and she needed to be in physical contact. The moment she pushed her power into the concrete, she could feel the material tremble. She didn't allow it to spread far from her hands. She didn't want to disintegrate the whole roof. A crack sounded. The concrete sunk an inch down and then shattered into shards that fell down inside the opening she'd created. Mercy withdrew her hands and sat back as she studied her little piece of destruction. The hole had a ragged rim with broken rebar sticking out of the fractured edge. It was big enough for her to lower herself through without getting caught on any of it, though. She quickly braided her long hair to get it out of the way, and then lowered herself down into the room below. She found herself in a barren, sizable space. There were no electric lights, but plenty of daylight that came in through large windows. Mercy noted a turned-over chair in a corner and thought it sturdy enough to use to get out the same way if necessary. The drop had not been that high. "All right," she whispered to herself, and then withdrew a pair of thin, black gloves. She put them on and then pulled the hood of her jacket over her head. She'd had it especially made for exactly this kind of situation. She fastened it to her hair with 2 small hairpins on the underside to keep it in place as she moved. The red color of her hair was too recognizable, and she didn't need the police remembering her face either. The hood didn't cover it, but shaded it enough. The fabric was thin and allowed her not to lose her peripheral vision entirely. It wasn't perfect, but it had done the trick on many occasions. The rest of the building seemed to follow the same pattern as the first room. As Mercy moved silently through corridors and rooms, there was nothing but white and gray walls. Some had paint flaking off the walls, others were newly painted. There was a sharp smell of paint mixed with the general shut-in and dry smell of the building. Wires hung from the ceilings, and there was hardly any furniture to be seen. There were many rooms with more than one door, and some even had holes in the walls that the construction crew had to be using as shortcuts. Likely those walls were to be torn down soon anyway. Toilets had been ripped out, though there were sinks here and there, even in what looked to be old kitchenettes and office spaces. A large production hall opened up a couple of floors down. There were old and big posters depicting out-of-style clothes as well as crews of women at their sewing machines. That meant that this had likely been an old clothes factory at some point. What they were going to do with it now was uncertain, but she did see construction equipment here and there. Still, that didn't matter much. The production hall, though, seemed to take up about half the main building on the outer side, opposite the courtyard. The other half was full of smaller rooms for workshops and offices. The inner wall of the hall was covered by walkways, like the one she'd stepped onto, as well as stairs between each floor and an array of wires and ventilation pipes. Mercy walked back into the inner part but heard little. The sirens from the fire were almost muted in there, and she heard nothing from outside the courtyard. She had searched through and moved down another floor when she came upon the first trace of Ryder, if one discounted the dead body outside. A set of legs was her first clue as she walked into an empty room and saw the rest of the body. Mercy stopped dead in her tracks and listened intently, but heard or saw nothing. She ran the last few steps to the security guard then, and saw to her horror that his head and shoulders were soaking wet. The light gray of his shirt was dark and wet at the top. She grabbed his limp hand and drew a sigh of relief to find it warm. Both pulse and breathing were also in order. She could see the flakes of paint, sand, and dust on the floor, all of it showing obvious scuff marks from the fight that must have taken place. Ryder was desperate. Such a fool. Mercy hauled at the man who was thrice her size and got him into the recovery position. The cops could tend to him later, she figured, and hurried to keep searching for Ryder. With Jack coming up from downstairs, they should be able to corner him somewhere before the police saw them. They were busy with the body outside, but that wouldn't last long. They needed to enter to find the killer. The only thing Mercy could hope for was that the chaos a few streets over prevented too many other cops from joining the three already there. The soft scrape of a shoe on a sandy surface caught Mercy's attention. She stopped and swung behind an open door. She glanced down, but she hadn't caused it. She'd have chastised herself had she done so. She'd learned to move silently, and the gravel, dust, and sand dragged inside by the workers caused her no challenge in that department. There was nothing to see, though. The whole building was light enough with all the large windows providing daylight. Still, there were more than enough shadows around to hide in. Mercy waited but heard no more. Ryder had to be a floor or more below or hiding somewhere up there. Considering he'd dealt with both the security guards and was still hiding, he knew he wasn't in the clear. He knew Jack was after him, but hopefully, he didn't know about Mercy. And he had to have seen the police presence outside. No, he wasn't going to make a sound if he could help it. Mercy began walking again, her steps light over the dirty floors, her focus intent on sounds and movements. Then, a shout rang through from downstairs. There were lots of open doors, most of them also connecting to the large production hall, so she had no trouble hearing. More shouting followed, unintelligible, but certainly not friendly. That had been more than one voice, though. Mercy got a bad feeling. She was currently on the side of the building that didn't face the courtyard, and she hurried to get to the other side, keeping her wits about her. The last thing she wanted was to be attacked by a panicked hydrokinetic because she wasn't paying attention. But Ryder wasn't there. She reached an empty room except for some paint buckets, and with a window facing the courtyard. She ran over and stared down. The body lay there, right in front of the 2 cars, and she realized she must be below the window where the man had been pushed out. She saw one of the uniformed men guarding the body as he talked into a radio. Then he stopped and glanced straight ahead, toward the building. A moment later, Mercy drew breath and clenched her fists. "Oh no!" She glared down as she saw the other uniform lead a man toward the cars alongside the detective, a young, dark-haired man. "What the hell, kid?" Even from that far above, she could see that they had handcuffed Jack, his hands restrained behind him. This only meant one thing. They'd come across him and arrested him for the murder. "Idiots," Mercy muttered as she felt anger flare up. She could only watch as the cops talked together, checked Jack's handcuffs, and then seemed to put him under some intense scrutiny. Judging by his defensive stance, they wouldn't get much from him. "Damn it, kid." They would likely search through the building still. There was another guard missing after all. But if Ryder managed to stay hidden from them, at least long enough to get out, then all this would be pinned on Jack. It didn't even matter that he couldn't have gotten from atop the building and down in that short a time. Not from the inside. The layout was too roundabout for that. "Damn it," she whispered again, as she could only see one way to help him. This would never have happened had she been on her own. This was why they worked alone, especially in the beginning. How else to separate the wheat from the chaff? Still, despite her anger, there really was only one thing to do. Chapter 5. When it came down to it, Jack was one of her kind, too. He might not represent the best of them, and in all honesty, neither did she, but he certainly wasn't the worst either. Jack had, after all, not pushed someone out of a 12-story window. Mercy sighed and took a glove off before she put her hand on the window. It wasn't that she couldn't use her ability with the gloves on, but they would disintegrate as well. No need for that. She eyed the large window that consisted of 9 panes held together by metal frames. "A distraction's a distraction," she mumbled and set to it. She felt the power leave her and spread into the glass and metal. It all shot forward with a snap and then cracked. She could see the shards of glass and metal alike before it all fell down, pushed outside. She could hear agitated shouting from below as the sharp pieces crashed to the ground and likely on the body. She felt a little bad about it, but the man couldn't feel it. Mercy stepped over to the now open square in the wall and kept to the side. Best not to be seen. "Someone's still in there!" one of the uniforms shouted. It was followed by loud talking, but the words themselves didn't reach Mercy. Still, she didn't need to understand to know they were coming inside. They had to now. After all, Jack couldn't possibly have done this. She could hear the slam of a door and dared to peek outside. The dead man was still there, the added glitter of broken glass now part of his grisly resting place. One uniform and the detective were missing. The last man was busy getting Jack into the back of the police car. 2 inside, 1 outside. No surprise there, Mercy thought as she began moving. They would obviously search this room, and she had no plan to be inside it. As for outside, they couldn't very well leave a crime scene, nor a suspect, unattended. Still, she could only hope this would help lessen their suspicions against Jack. That hope wasn't particularly strong. Cops were thick-headed and stubborn, but at least she'd tried. More corridors and rooms passed by as she moved with care. Jack had been right. The only things in there were the occasional equipment for the reconstruction like ladders, power tools, and heavier machinery. Nothing that was of any use to Mercy. She could hear movement further down in the building. The cops didn't hide themselves the same way she did. They didn't have to. She knew they were armed, and she knew they were too confident in their weapons' power because they were oblivious to the actual threats inside the building. Still, her eyes sought out every nook and cranny she passed, making mental notes on places to hide should she need it. "Clear!" sounded from the floor below not long after. Mercy jumped back from a flight of stairs and moved toward a nearby room, hoping it, like most of the rooms in there, had several doors leading elsewhere, especially away from those stairs. A creak and a hiss sounded as she stepped inside. It did not come from her. Mercy froze as she laid eyes on a man a few years younger than herself. Ryder Faring, who else could it be? Looked spooked without being startled by her. He was tall with a wide, angular face, light brown hair and stubble. He had at least 4 inches on her and about 60 pounds. Unlike Hadwin, though, this was 60 pounds of what looked like muscle beneath a black t-shirt and an open button-down. The man worked in construction, after all. He needed some strength for that. His brother was a known small-time thug, much like Jack, only Jack lacked Caden's mean streak. Mercy was beginning to suspect Ryder was more like his brother. His initially startled face morphed into a grimace of angered panic. "You too?" he blurted and took an involuntary step back. Oh yes. Jack had startled him, and although Mercy didn't know too much about this guy, Ryder had heard of her all right. "Me indeed. You've been doing bad things, Ryder. Feel flattered they sent so many after you." "Crap!" he snarled and looked around, reminding Mercy of a startled animal, which meant he was likely to panic. Would he bolt or attack? "You even drew the attention of the cops," Mercy went on, gauging his every movement. She didn't particularly want to be his center of attention should he attack. "You know what that means." "I'm in so much trouble," he hissed. "Clear!" sounded again, closer this time. Ryder startled again and backed up more, through a door that appeared to lead into another empty room. Mercy followed him, a few steps between them. "Listen to me, Ryder. We can figure this out. You just have to come with me." "The hell I do." He held his hands up in a defensive manner, but it made Mercy stop dead in her tracks. Usually, people with kinetic powers would use their hands to control whatever they could. Some didn't, but it seemed to help them focus. She had no clue what Ryder did, and didn't want to find out the hard way. "I know what you'll do to me," he snarled. Mercy took a step, but halted. The thing about active powers was that they were limited like a punch. You had to think before doing it. If one was fast enough, they could be stopped. That applied to her as well, but right now, there was a doorway between them. He'd have time to react. She saw him smile then. She really should have jumped out of the way. As it was, Ryder moved his right hand and sent something for the door. Before Mercy could blink, the damn thing smacked into her. She was thrown off balance and crashed to the floor, dust whirling up around her. She cried out in surprise and turned over, only to see the back of Ryder as he ran away. Mercy got up on her feet in a painfully fast movement, noted the large stain of water on the door, and then heard the raised voices of the cops. "There he is!" the detective shouted, sort of. Her voice was restrained yet commanding. Mercy used the opportunity to run back into the corridor where she'd come from. To her right, she saw the 2 cops following Ryder who had exited through a door that led into the same corridor. Mercy swore under her breath and then headed for the stairs they'd come up. "Hey, Jones, there's one here too," the uniform with the platinum blonde hair shouted as he must have looked back. Mercy flew down the stairs as she heard footsteps thundering behind her. She could hear the man shouting for her to stop, but she kept on. Room by room flew by her as she ran. She had no clue where to go. She had no intention of ending up where Jack was, though. A half-filled bucket of nails stood next to a room with lots of torn-down plaster and wood inside. Mercy grabbed it as she passed by and then flung the thing backward without stopping to see. She heard it crash to the floor and then some impressive cursing as the uniform sounded like he stumbled. There would have been screams, though, had he fallen face first into the nails, so Mercy didn't stop to look. She ran, pushed on until she reached another set of stairs and then flew down. The whole building was a mishmash of old doors and new holes that had been ripped into walls. It seemed the new owners needed more open space than the previous ones. Mercy could only be thankful as she ran through one of these large and uneven openings and soon dared to stop. She could hear muffled shouting from above. The cops had been faster than she anticipated. At least they weren't trigger-happy. Of course, she wasn't armed, and as far as she could tell, neither was Ryder. That did not mean the cops weren't a threat. Mercy stood for a moment, slowing her breathing. It took more than this to make her winded, but she needed to be calm to hear properly. The uniform had been slowed down by the nails and the bucket. She could hear someone on the same floor as her now, though. Someone who walked with slow and quiet steps. It was the soft whispers that gave them away. It meant the two cops must have found each other again. Did that mean Ryder had also found his way down to that floor? Mercy walked through more rooms, finding nothing to help her. She was still too far up to use the windows. She had no wish to end up like the dead security guard. Rooms filled with lots of insulation and large pipes emerged as she stayed ahead of the others. She wasn't sure, but the wide metal pipes looked like ventilation pipes. Still, they weren't big enough to hide in or behind, and she discarded the thought as something unusual drew her attention. Mercy lowered her brows as she noticed one of the walls starting to bulge a little. Walls were not supposed to do that. Mercy stepped back. She knew she needed to run. There was only one door in this room, and she needed to exit through it before the whispering cops caught up. But the wall held her attention, simply for the absurdity of the sight. When the light gray bulge pushed in far enough, the whole thing gave way with a sound between a crack and a pop. Mercy ran to the wall and to the side of the hole as water and plaster poured inside. She was amazed at Ryder's strength and control. This was not only flinging water about. He could gather and control it to a great extent. He'd even condensed enough to slam the door into her upstairs, and now he was breaking through walls. Still, if water could carve out mountains, then she shouldn't be surprised he could do this. It was all about pressure. Mercy held her breath, tuned out the raised voices of the cops further down the hall, and braced herself. Then she exhaled. When Ryder's face popped out in profile through the wet and uneven opening, she launched a sideways kick that landed squarely in his face. Ryder yelped in pain, but Mercy gave him no chance to recover. She lunged forward, grabbed the arm he was automatically raising to his face, and pulled him into the room, sending an elbow into his side. The man stumbled to the floor. "Last chance, Ryder," she hissed at him, knowing they couldn't avoid the cops if they stayed there. "If you come with me now, this might not end as badly as—" "Down there!" the uniform shouted from out in the corridor. Mercy glanced up a mere second, which was all Ryder needed in his panic. He roared up from the floor, flailing his arms like a madman who managed to hit his enemy. Mercy staggered back at the impact and succeeded in stopping, despite the pain of an arm at the side of her neck. She leaped forward. Ryder was faster. He ducked, and instead of going to the floor, he eased himself under Mercy, rose up with her above, and flipped her over. She barely registered the pipes before the ceiling came into view. She cried out as she crashed into the pipes and fell between them. She heard shouting, a gunshot, and more yelling. All she could think of in her state of pain and confusion was to get away. Without giving it a second thought, she placed her hand on the floor and sent her power into it. She felt it fracture under her before she fell like the shards of the floor. Gravity made its ruthless pull, but not for long as she crashed into something hard and unforgiving. She thought she heard more screaming but wasn't sure. She couldn't be bothered either as the luring call of unconsciousness became too tempting and painless. Chapter 6. The air smelled dry and dirty, and Mercy felt a sneeze come on. She wasn't sure where she was, but the sense of pain in her side told her not to. She clamped a hand over her nose and held her breath, waiting for the sensation to pass. She noticed her left glove was now gone. "See where he went," a male voice said nearby. Mercy thanked the stars she hadn't made a sound. When the tickle subsided, she let go and took a deep, soundless breath. "Something is wrong here. Seriously wrong," a female voice said. Mercy tried taking in her surroundings while pinpointing the voices. It was the cops, obviously. But where? She herself lay in a dark place, though there was light streaming in through cracks. She turned her head and saw that she lay perched on a set of ventilation pipes that protruded from the wall to her immediate right below a set of stairs. The pipes went back into the wall a few feet in front of her. To her left, she saw the large open space of the factory proper. The room seemed to rise through 10 out of the 12 stories in the building. She could see traces high on the wall from a long, torn-down mezzanine. She could only imagine the number of seamstresses that had worked here when the business had been booming. All the space in the part of the building facing the courtyard were filled with rooms for the more specialized products, as well as offices. No wonder the place felt like a labyrinth. A crackling sound came from below her, and Mercy focused her attention on the walkways and stairs under her. The wall was full of them, likely fast access to most of the building for people who'd bustled about in the factory's heydays. "How's the backup coming, Badal?" the male voice said. A moment later, he came walking into Mercy's view, right below her. She could see that he was talking into the radio mounted by his shoulder. There was more crackling before the answer came. "They're working on it. The fire in Cinder Street's spreading. We need to handle this ourselves." "Seriously?" The uniform sputtered back. "They should be here in not too long," Badal answered. Mercy assumed him to be the cop guarding the dead body and Jack outside. "Crap!" the uniform said, and turned as the detective reached him. "Calm down, Jacoby," she said. "They can't be far." "Well, it amazes me how those guys keep escaping us." "Yeah, me too," she said, and stopped. She glanced around, her gun in her hand, pointed downward. "And they're not guys, though. The one in the dark clothes is a woman." "Huh," Jacoby said. "Barely saw her even when she was running. Damn fast." "Yeah, and they're not working together. Weird, that." Mercy could see her turning this way and that, but she couldn't see her face from right above. What she could see, though, was the shards of wood around the cop's feet. She glanced up and saw the floor she'd landed on was only a thin sheet of plywood, likely put there to prevent the loose pipes upstairs from falling down. Luckily, the hole Mercy had made in her dazed state wasn't big enough for them to fall through. She could see them covering the opening as they'd rolled over it when she fell down. "Well, maybe killing Deemer scared them into a panic," Jacoby said. "Maybe," Detective Jones said, but by the sound of her voice, she didn't seem convinced. "The woman doesn't appear panicked." She took a step forward, and Mercy held her breath as the other woman nearly stepped on a jagged shard of wood that was surrounded by a little sawdust. "Deemer didn't deserve that for doing his job," Jacoby said. Mercy couldn't agree more. The man really hadn't deserved that. Panicking was one thing, but Ryder had stepped so far out of line by killing the man he had to be stopped. The radio crackled again. "Movement on the 5th floor, Badal's voice came through. "Saw him in a window." "Be right there," Jacoby answered as both he and Jones began walking at speed. Mercy watched them in silence, her eyes on their backs as they moved fast across the walkway. A few more steps and she could get down and use all the stairways to her advantage. She had been in the least opportune parts of the building so far. She saw Jacoby disappear through a doorway that likely led into the inner part of the main building, near the western wing. The detective, on the other hand, stopped. Mercy sucked air between her teeth as the woman turned slowly and looked back. "Jones?" Jacoby's voice came trailing back to her. Go ahead, Jones called back. Be right there. She kept staring, and Mercy realized she was looking at the spot where she and Jacoby had just been standing, right where the jagged shards of wood lay. Mercy glanced back at her as the woman raised her eyes to the ventilation pipes above. Damn, Mercy whispered as she was spotted. She didn't hesitate any more than the detective did as the latter raised her weapon. Mercy defied the pain in her side and gathered her legs under her in a crouch before she moved forward and jumped down on the walkway, rolling as she hit. She moved up and didn't pay much attention to the detective's shout for her to freeze. She saw a glimpse of Jones moving back the way she'd come, but Mercy had no intention to stay and welcome her. Instead, she took 1 second to consider her surroundings before she grabbed onto the railing and jumped over. She landed on a narrow flight of stairs below and felt a pang of pain shoot through her legs at the impact. Instead of running down the stairs, she swung over another set of railings. She used the multiple railings on crossing walkways and narrow stairs to climb down on the outside. What the hell? She gasped as she glanced up and saw the detective jumping off a walkway and down to a flight of stairs on the opposite side of the massive wall. Then she ran down the stairs. Who was this woman? Cops weren't usually this invested. Mercy pushed the question aside and stayed her course, but Jones was quick. Moments after Mercy felt the floor of the old production hall under her feet, she heard the sound of Jones's running change as she now also had the floor to move on. Stop! Detective Jones's voice echoed through the hall, making her sound louder than she really was. Yeah, right, Mercy mumbled under her breath as she began running. She had planned on finding a door back into the inner part of the building, but unfortunately, the cop was between her and several of them. She knew she was running toward a dead end. Jack had told her as much. All other doors were barred to avoid break-ins while the construction work was going on. Hey, stop! Jones repeated. Mercy didn't, her arms pumping as she sprinted across the hall. There was no way for the detective to catch up, unless the doors were shut tight. Impossible to unlock. Oh God, Mercy's only chance could be to disintegrate the door. She couldn't do that in front of a cop. She couldn't. A shot blasted through the space, the bullet hitting the floor a few feet to Mercy's right. Dust and concrete sprayed from the impact. She skidded to a halt, arms up for protection, stupid as that was. Had the cop missed on purpose or not? The next one goes in your leg, Jones shouted. Bluffing, Mercy whispered to herself. She ran, but Jones had caught up during Mercy's little halt. The woman was bluffing. She wouldn't shoot an unarmed person in the back, but she would tackle them. Mercy yelped as her feet were kicked out from under her. She fell to her side and landed awkwardly on her hip. Instinct and years of experience had her push the pain aside. She couldn't spare any attention for that. Instead, her whole focus was on the detective who'd dropped her with a side tackle. Jones had lost her own balance and fallen, though. Mercy was faster in getting up. As Jones tried aiming, Mercy kicked the weapon out of her hand. It didn't fall far, but Jones was alert for Mercy's moves now. With a force of strength, she rolled backward and out of Mercy's reach. She got to her feet, too, ducking under Mercy's fist as she sent it for the woman's face. The miss earned her a sideways elbow in the gut. Mercy gasped as she stepped back, but Jones was on a roll now. Mercy blocked a blow aimed at her face but missed the subsequent jab at her thigh. God, the woman was fast. The impact had her twist with it to avoid more pain than necessary, a motion that Jones took advantage of. Mercy felt an arm snake around her neck as she was pulled back toward Jones. She could feel the tug in her hair as the detective tried pulling her hood off. At least the pins held. Mercy wasn't at a complete disadvantage, though. Jones's curiosity was a mistake, and Mercy took advantage. She stepped to the side, grabbed Jones's arm, and pushed between them with her own free hand. Then she kicked back, sweeping her foot under Jones's so she lost her balance. She heard the woman gasp as Mercy threw her over her shoulder and to the floor. The detective landed on her back and ass, a yelp of pain and a sudden flash of anger on her face. She noticed the woman's eyes were an unusual amber, which made it seem like they flared in the anger expressed in that face. She couldn't afford the time to stop and stare, though. Instead, she ran the few steps between her and Jones's gun. She picked it up and turned as the other woman rolled around and got up on her feet. "Miss, you don't want to do that," Jones warned as she noticed her own weapon in someone else's hand. They both stopped for a moment, trying to catch their breaths. Mercy could see Jones staring, attempting to get a proper glimpse of Mercy's face, just like Mercy had done with her. Her hood shielded her enough, though, and she knew how to keep her head angled so she could see but not be seen properly herself. Mercy began moving, walking backward. The damn detective stepped forward. "Miss, stop it." So polite, so professional, even now. "You don't know what you're doing." The comment only elicited a smirk from Mercy, and she noted the instant narrowing of Jones's eyes as she paid attention to her every move. Another shot sounded, though not from the hall. Mercy glanced back and up, but could obviously not see anything. It had to be Ryder and the uniform, though. As she turned back, she realized Jones was moving toward her. Was she insane, too? Mercy shook her head and took several steps back, the gun pointed straight at the cop. She didn't give up, did she? Mercy glanced at the gun. She felt a desperate need to destroy it, to make sure this cop could pose no threat with it. She couldn't, though. That would be breaking every rule. She gave an imperceptible sigh as she held the weapon. Oh, well, at least she'd only touched the thing with her gloved hand. Mercy saw no other option than to shoot. So she did. Twice into the floor, forcing Jones back. Then, Mercy began running herself. She shot a third bullet, effectively creating a large gap between herself and the detective. Then she threw the gun sideways. It skidded across the floor until it was stopped by the wall. Mercy knew Jones would have to run and retrieve it before she could follow. A glance over her shoulder told her she was correct, right as she barged through a door and left the hall. Chapter 7. They were in so much trouble. Ryder was right about that at least, though it did not only extend to him. That detective was not only relentless, she was also capable and curious. That was almost worse. Mercy ran up several stairs and through corridors and rooms, hoping to lose Jones until she reached the 5th floor. Just because Mercy had bought herself a few seconds didn't mean she was rid of the woman. A shout sounded from further down the corridor she was in, and she sped up. If the uniform had caught up to Ryder, then there was no telling what he'd do. Actually, there was no telling what either would do. If Ryder revealed himself, the cop might panic. They usually did. Learning the world was not as orderly as they were trained to keep it had caused nastiness and trouble on more than one occasion throughout history. She heard clanging and slamming further ahead and pressed on, pinpointing what she thought was the right room as she neared it. "Damn it!" was shouted from within, and Mercy slowed a little, hoping to surprise them as she entered. Unfortunately, Officer Jacoby was not doing what she thought. As she was about to run through the door, the man came leaping out, about to head down the corridor as he and Mercy crashed into one another. She could hear his startled and cut-off cry of surprise near her ear as they slammed together in what had to look like an awkward, sideways hug. You? You there?" He tried as he realized he needed to stop her. Mercy was having none of that. Being so close, she grabbed his gun hand at the wrist with her left. She took a swift half-step back and threw herself forward, spinning around as she placed her right hand on the ground. Jacoby lost his balance both from the surprise and the pull and fell forward. The gun clattered to the floor as Mercy twisted his wrist with her forward flip. As she landed on her feet, knees bent, she let go of him, kicked sideways and hit him in the shoulder, and then grabbed his weapon. "No, you can't!" he gasped, but Mercy was already running, gun in hand. She had no time to waste, and Ryder couldn't be far judging by Jacoby's audible frustration before he crashed into her. She heard shouting behind her and didn't stop to look. All she needed to hear was that the voices were both Jacoby and Jones, who must have caught up by now. Mercy took an abrupt right and ran through several small rooms, likely old offices, that faced out toward the large production hall. She could hear faraway steps as the cops followed. In one office, she noticed the small window could open, and she wasted no time. She flicked the latches and opened the narrow pane. It wasn't too narrow to climb, though, and that was all that mattered. She glanced down on her way out. The walkways and stairs were there, ready to help her down again, but she was beginning to see how that wouldn't help with the detective on her heels. One glance up, and Mercy was off. She climbed fast and strained muscles that under normal circumstances would have protested more. In the end, though, she found herself perched on a tiny, narrow ledge full of old wires that stretched across the wall and back into the small offices. With one hand, she barely managed to hold on to the bottom of one staircase above. Jacoby's gun was still settled in her left hand. "Where'd she go?" came said gun owner's voice from the room she'd left. Mercy stared down and saw a tiny gap in the window. She thought she had closed it properly. It must have slid open again, just a little. Enough for her to hear them. Enough for them to notice her. "She's so fast," Jacoby went on. "Yes," came the measured voice of the detective. "Where's your sidearm, Jacoby?" "Where'd you think? She damn well stole it from me." "Crap," Jones responded, and made no further comment. Not like she was riding a high horse in that regard. "You ever come across anything like this?" "No," Jones said. "You?" "I've arrested Ryder Faring once. Petty larceny, but I have no clue what's happening here. Who is that woman?" "Right now, I'm more interested in where she went." Mercy felt her adrenaline-fueled heart beating hard in her chest, but managed to slow her breathing. "Here, maybe," Jacoby said a second before the window was pushed open, and she saw his platinum blonde mane as he peeked out and down. "Don't look up. Don't look up." Much as she disliked the police, Mercy did not want to shoot one of them, or let go and hurt him and herself as she fell down. "See anything?" "Nah, empty as a churchyard." "She's likely gone down a floor or two." Jacoby's head retracted inside, and Mercy gave a silent sigh of relief. She heard them leave the room, but waited a moment longer before she began moving. She didn't trust them not to come back to double-check, but she couldn't wait for them to enter the walkways again either. They were likely looking for the nearest door, not wanting to jump through the window. Mercy checked the gun and then managed to secure it in the waistline of her pants, freeing her left hand. Then she grabbed better hold of the underside of the staircase above and climbed her way down, thankful the stairs had no rises between the steps. When the drop was acceptable, she let go and landed on a walkway. She ran to the nearest stairs and went down a floor before she set her sights on another door and entered the inner part of the main building again. Right as she was about to close it behind her, did she hear the voices of the cops as they came out up there. She closed the door without a sound and then continued her search. Any normal person would have left by now, but she knew she couldn't do that. Her job was to see things like this through for the good of their kind, to protect them. And right now, Ryder was a threat. He probably didn't even realize how much so himself. A room full of torn-out wires and pieces of steel caught her attention. She walked inside and realized the construction workers were using it as some sort of disposal room. Likely they would throw everything into a dumpster at some point, via a nearby window that opened down into the courtyard. What interested Mercy the most, though, were the piles of scrap metal. She stepped closer and took the gun out. She knew if this gun was used to shoot anyone by her, the cop it belonged to would likely get troubled and start looking for the hooded woman who'd stolen it. Sooner or later, some idiot might give away that information. It wouldn't be her own kind. No, they all knew better than to trust cops, but Mercy did come in contact with outsiders as part of her job who might recognize the description. There really was nothing to it. She held it out with her left, ungloved hand and sent her power into it. The weapon cracked and then fell from her grip, the dark shards blending with the rest of the metal in the pile. The little clangs were the only sound as they spread and clattered and then rested, invisible while in plain sight. Then the steps of someone running caught her attention. Someone out in the corridor. She could only hear one set of steps as she crept closer to the door. Jagged breath, almost panicky. Mercy nodded to herself. This was not the cops. Just as she heard him pass by the door she was behind, she stepped into the corridor. "Ryder!" she snapped to the back of the man. Oddly enough, he stopped and stared back. Then he seemed to remember that everyone was after him. He pressed on, and Mercy cursed under her breath as she followed. He was fast, faster than she expected a man his size to be. But then, panic was driving him now. He knew what he had done, both to his community as well as society at large. Punishments were waiting all around. "Ryder, stop, damn you!" More rooms and equipment flew past as she followed him through doorways and more holes in the walls. He was desperate now, but no matter how fast his fear made him, Mercy gained on him with every step. "No! Please!" he yelped when she was so close she threw herself forward and toppled him over. They both crashed onto the dusty and filthy floor. The man didn't kick, but his panic had him wriggle and flail so much a foot sent Mercy rolling along the floor. She gasped with surprise more than pain as she went with it, and got to her feet in the same motion. She didn't hesitate as she saw Ryder try and get up. A quick and well-placed kick to the side of his knee sent him staggering into the nearest wall. She saw him wave a hand then and threw herself to the side a fraction of a moment before an explosion of water made the floor shake. Another one was sent toward her, and she simply reacted without thinking, doing a backflip that still had her stagger when the water hit the floor where she'd been a second ago. The force of the little explosion unsettled her landing. Water balls? Well, it was better than having fireballs thrown after her, she supposed. Getting hit by one of those condensed balls of water, though, would no doubt send her flying nonetheless, which meant she needed to be too close for him to hit her with those. Ryder was still reeling from the impact with the wall, and she was on him at once. She ducked a fist sent her way, right before her own knuckles made contact with the man's solar plexus. Ryder gasped and groaned in pain as he bent forward, no chance against his own aches to remain fully upright. Mercy grabbed hold of his neck, but she underestimated his need to escape. The man yelled something as he forced his upper body back up, his left arm pushing at Mercy. Somehow, her only way out from between him and the wall was up, and she found herself clinging to the man's back, trying to get her arms properly around his neck. "No!" he shouted and slammed back into the wall behind them to try and get rid of her. Mercy cried out in pain as her back hit the wall. It left her dazed for a moment Ryder used to repeat the maneuver. Pain flashed through her with bolts of agony, and her brain screamed at her to either get her arms around his neck and gain control or get the hell off. But seconds later, she would come to miss the pain of the wall. Ryder reached back, likely to throw her off like she had done with the detective down in the production hall, but he must have changed his mind as he felt her face under his hand. Mercy's instinct was to bite, but her teeth never sank into flesh as a wash of water filled her mouth. She gagged on a muted scream as she felt water trickle from his hand and all over her face. She felt her feet lowered to the floor as Ryder turned and pushed her against the wall, keeping her up, his hand still covering her face. "You menders are all freaking insane," he snarled at her, but she couldn't say anything back. Her voice was muted in her throat, her mouth and nose full of water, cold and raw. She could barely see as Ryder loomed in front of her, up in her face. Her lungs screamed for air, and she knew she couldn't hold off for long. Her tongue blocked her throat, trying desperately to keep the water out of her mouth, out of her lungs. But the pressure he induced was so strong. Too strong. The world started turning black and then bright, Ryder's face fading and becoming clear. She needed to breathe, but the pressure was too much. She could feel her tongue pushed back into her throat, the water forcing its way, wanting to reach her lungs and fill them instead of the air she so needed. A gunshot startled Ryder so badly, Mercy could feel the motion even in her half-dazed state. "Let go of her, Faring!" a voice shouted. Mercy felt the pressure release. She gagged at once, almost throwing up as she sank down on her knees behind Ryder, alternately heaving for air and spitting out water. "Ryder Faring, you are under arrest," came Jacoby's monotone voice. "You have the right." Mercy gasped and coughed as she glanced sideways, half hidden by Ryder's legs, but there was no running. She could see Detective Jones standing a few feet away, gun pointed at Ryder, though a slight change of an angle would put Mercy right in her line of sight. This time, Mercy had no doubt she would be shot in the leg, if the detective felt inclined to be that nice. Mercy drew in a big gulp of air, trying to focus her brain, trying to see a way out, but no. The two doors were blocked by either the cops or Ryder. When they were done reading Ryder his rights, Mercy knew she was next. Chapter 8. "Miss, can you stand?" Jones's voice came level and commanding. Mercy put her hand flat on the wall and stood, Ryder's bigger frame shielding her from the cops. She could feel the wet hood as parts of it was plastered to her left cheek and forehead, but it still covered her face well enough. "Miss, step forward, please." Please. Mercy would have snorted at this professional politeness had her throat allowed it. As it was, she remained silent and behind Ryder. "Step forward, miss. We know you're armed." Of course, Jacoby's gun. Mercy didn't much like being shot, so she raised both hands in the air, showing that she didn't have it, at least not ready to fire at them. "This is a mistake," Ryder attempted. "I didn't even do anything." "Shut up, Mr. Faring," Jones said, more worried about Mercy than him it seemed. "Jacoby, have you got your cuffs or did they steal those off you as well?" A groan escaped the officer, but he stepped forward. "Her first," Jones told him, and Mercy didn't object. Instead, she turned her back on him, avoiding him seeing her face. She waited until he took hold of her hands and pulled them behind her back, slapping the cuffs on her. The metal felt cold against her ungloved left hand. "Okay, now him." Mercy heard the clink of metal as Jones handed Jacoby her own cuffs to put on Ryder. Except Ryder had no intention of being restrained in any way whatsoever. Instead, he elbowed Jacoby in the side and made a run for it, banking on not being shot, or not caring. Jacoby stumbled sideways, pushing Mercy into the wall where she struggled to keep her balance. "Stop!" Jones shouted as she took a shot at Ryder, who ducked and flailed wildly with his arms yet didn't stop. Warning shots did not work with someone like him. "Jacoby!" Jones urged as the officer got his bearings back. "I'm on it!" the man yelled and ran after Ryder. By the look of Detective Jones's face, that had not been her plan, but she turned fast enough and pointed her gun at Mercy again. "Don't move!" Mercy had only been doing so to keep from falling, but she managed to steady herself despite her restrained hands. She remained with her side against the wall, though, not facing Jones. "Who the hell are you?" Jones asked as she eyed Mercy. She stepped a little closer and took in both Mercy's hood as well as her single glove. "Don't want to be recognized, huh? Are you in our system?" Mercy couldn't help but scoff. Of course she wasn't. She'd taken great care over the years not to be, and today was not going to be the day that changed. "I see," Jones said, taking Mercy's nonverbal reaction for the negative it was. "Well," she stepped even closer, gun raised and aimed at Mercy, her left hand stretched out, reaching for the hood. "Let's see how you look under there then, miss, so I can remember." Mercy turned then and put her back against the wall like she wanted to make it easier for Jones to pull back the hood. What the detective couldn't see was Mercy's little trick with the cuffs. No set of handcuffs had ever held her, but she couldn't have them fall apart on the floor. Cops especially would see that as suspicious. So, she twisted her left hand and managed to get one of the links on the chain between her thumb and forefinger. Such precision demanded more concentration than breaking through a concrete roof, but that couldn't be helped. Not even with the other woman reaching for her hood, her hand mere inches away. At Mercy's urging, the small link smoldered between her fingers, nothing but tiny fragments and dust of metal falling to the floor. Mercy looked up a little then and noticed Jones did not have her finger on the trigger. She wasn't going to kill someone willy-nilly, was she? No, she might be unyielding, but she was by the book. Even the right kind of cop turned bad when faced with the truth, though. Mercy snatched hold of Jones's wrists, forcing her gun hand out to the side, away from Mercy's head. She pulled Jones toward her, saw rage flashing in the detective's eyes as she was caught off guard and couldn't brace herself properly. The gun went off, making plaster spray from the freshly painted ceiling. Mercy startled, and her planned kick toward Jones's stomach landed on her thigh instead. Still, it sent the woman reeling to the floor, gun still in her hand. Mercy didn't wait for her to gather her senses enough to shoot or get up. She bolted for the nearest door, not caring that it wasn't the one Ryder had run through. She heard shouting first, and then the unmistakable sound of shoes slapping down on the floor as Jones followed. Mercy pushed on. If not on the run from her, she would have been impressed by the stubbornness of the woman. Again, she found herself running blindly through a building she knew too little about. Trying to shake the cop on her heels proved more difficult, as said cop was not willing to give up. No matter the runarounds, Mercy couldn't shake her. "Stop!" Jones shouted as she spotted Mercy from further down a dusty and messy corridor. Mercy ran into yet another room, past buckets and paintbrushes, and saw only one other door leading out. She passed through and saw it was a dead end. "No," she wheezed as she glanced around. No escape. No choice. She turned around. She only had seconds. She could not reveal herself to a cop. Not to an outsider of any sort without good reason, but certainly not a cop. She slammed her hands on the wall next to the door she'd passed through and forced her power into it. She felt the wall tremble under her touch, and she stared up, trying to limit the damage. She didn't want to collapse the whole damn thing. The wall shifted. Large cracks ran up, cutting through the plaster at first in the shape of jagged lightning. Then it started to crumble. Mercy stepped back and watched the door and the wall around it vanish as it fell down and created a massive pile of debris. It barred the opening and had to be climbed to pass through. The dust whirled around as Mercy heard Jones's footsteps on the other side. "What the?" the other woman uttered at the sight. Mercy ran over to the opposite wall and created a smaller hole there, banking on anyone not being able to tell it apart from all the other shortcuts the construction crew had made. If they did, they wouldn't think to pin it on a woman who could create it the way she could. The next room provided her with both a lengthy rope and another door. She ran fast, simply to create some distance between herself and Jones. She knew full well that the detective would not be stopped by an unstable wall. A minute later, she came across what she needed. She would bet money Jones was heading for the nearest stairs, so that was a no-go. Mercy glanced out the window and saw the police cars were further to her right. She needed to judge this correctly, and she would only have one chance. She fastened the rope to a support beam and opened the window. She climbed up to the sill and stared out again, hoping the third cop, Badal, wouldn't spot her. She could see the man pacing back and forth, keeping an eye on both the building and the dead security guard. What had the cops called him? Deemer? Mercy felt bad for him, but couldn't think about that now. She leaned out a little, hoping for a moment when the officer would look away, but as it was, he would notice her climbing out. She was about to abandon the whole scheme when Badal turned and went back to the patrol car, which was moving? Mercy narrowed her eyes in confusion. But yeah, the car was bouncing a little. Badal strode over to the passenger side before stopping by the door to the back seat, his back turned to Mercy. "Thanks, kid," she said, and grabbed better hold of the rope. She lowered herself out and then climbed. The lack of a glove didn't allow her much speed if she wanted to spare her left hand from rope burns. Luckily, though, it wasn't far. Jones was likely already headed down, so Mercy skipped one window before she found herself hanging next to the one 2 floors below. She gave a quick glance toward Padal, but he was still arguing with Jack, who'd moved over to the other side of the passenger seat to do just that. It wouldn't last long, she knew that. She pressed her left hand against the window and sent every bit of focus she could spare to break it as she hung by one hand. The muscles in her arm were strained, and she couldn't quite shake the thought that 4 stories were still more than enough for a hard crash with the ground below. The glass shattered and fell inside the frame for the most part. Mercy grabbed the rope with both hands again and swung, only a little. She didn't need much more before she let go and landed on the sill first, before the momentum forced her forward. She hit the floor, the shards of glass shattering under her shoes. For a moment she was sure she'd tip forward and land on her face, but sheer force of balance and will had her stop just in time. She exhaled hard, not realizing she'd held her breath. Then she allowed no more time for any kind of thought on the matter. She returned to the window, glanced outside, saw Badal waving his arms in frustration at Jack in the car, and grabbed the rope. She sighed as she sent her power through it and watched it dissolve into small, soft pieces. They fluttered down to the ground below, hard to spot at a distance. Less noisy, too, as soft materials didn't crack at her touch as hard ones did. They sort of fell apart without the ragged-edged shards she usually caused. Mercy stepped back over the broken glass. There was no avoiding the crunch under her shoes, and she was glad of the thick soles that protected her feet. Still, she heard no one coming. No one was drawn by the noise she'd had no choice but to make. She headed for the nearest door. She knew where Ryder was going, though. The only way he could possibly hope to go to escape. He needed to reach the ground floor to get out and flee. She was not going to allow that, not after all this. Chapter 9. Mercy made an abrupt stop as she heard a noise. It sounded like a soft clang. She glanced up as if she could stare right through the ceiling. Had it come from upstairs? She hoped so. It would buy her some time. She pushed the hood out of her eyes and walked on. The still wet fabric was annoying, but it couldn't be helped. She noticed she was in a different area of the building now as she passed larger and more open rooms. A few contained some old and rusted lockers that had long since been put out of use. A strangled noise had her stop dead in her tracks again. What was that? Mercy looked around, but she was alone in the corridor. No indication either cop was near. A choked cry reached her, and dread coiled in her stomach at once. She knew that sound. She'd made it herself only minutes ago. "Ryder!" she shouted as she began jogging down the corridor. The sound of something crashing to the floor showed her the way. She knew what it had to be. Officer Jacoby had run after Ryder. He couldn't have been far behind. He could have caught up and... The policeman had indeed caught up. Mercy entered a large break room with a small kitchenette and found herself facing Ryder. His eyes looked wide and wild as he held Jacoby from behind, his hand covering the lower part of the man's face. "Ryder, stop, goddamn you!" Mercy walked inside as she ordered him to let go, but Ryder didn't listen. Jacoby was trying to twist out of his grip, but he couldn't. Mercy knew what was happening to him. He was fighting the water that was being pushed down his throat. She could see it flooding from Ryder's hand, Jacoby's mouth and nose overflowing as the pressure was too much. "Get away from me," Ryder said, struggling, yet succeeding in keeping the cop under his control. "I'll kill him. I swear I will." "I know," Mercy said as she scanned the space around her for something to use against him. There were tables and chairs in there, and the small kitchenette had several coffee mugs and a coffee maker on a short counter next to a sink and a tiny refrigerator. That was about it. Likely the construction crew used the space these days. "Ryder," she tried reasoning, knowing Jacoby didn't have much time. "Listen to me. You clearly know who I am." She picked up a dirty mug as she stepped over the shards of one that had been broken during the men's altercation. She held it up, out of Jacoby's confused sight, and let it crack and shatter while she simply held it by the handle, between thumb and index finger. Ryder's brows lowered in confusion at the sight. "Unless you let him go, I'll do that to you." "Stay away from me," Ryder snapped. "Can't do that. You know I can't. Let him go or you'll shatter like that mug, only meatier and severely agonizing." She could hear the urgency in her own voice, and likely, so could he. "You touch me, he dies too, right?" Jacoby's whole body began convulsing as he couldn't get air into his lungs. Ryder was fueled by adrenaline, holding the other man up, stepping back and forth a little to keep his balance. "Are you willing to take that chance?" Mercy countered. She wasn't sure herself. She was usually pretty good with her aim, but two people so close? She couldn't risk it. "You're bluffing," Ryder said, calling it. "Ryder," Mercy warned, seeing Jacoby's eyes closing as his body gave less of a fight. She glanced around in desperation, her gaze falling on a lamp above. An old type with a wide metal lampshade around it. It wasn't that far up. She reached out in a last-ditch effort and focused on destroying it. It cracked immediately, close enough and small enough not to warrant her touch. Ryder glanced up to see what she was doing and pushed the cop away, which was lucky for Jacoby and less so for Ryder. The jagged metal shards were like a rain of razors, the pieces of the light bulb not helping in the least. Ryder cried out in shock and pain as he backed away. Mercy lunged for him, but he escaped her clutches with nothing but instinct. He moved around a few of the tables to avoid her, all the while pulling at the metal that had cut and pricked his skin. "Ryder!" she yelled. Then she glanced back at Jacoby. "No! Ryder, stop!" But he didn't. Mercy was about to follow as she groaned in frustration and turned and knelt by the cop. There was only a narrow window for this, and judging by the lack of death warning, she would succeed in helping him. She pinched the man's nose and tilted his head so his chin jutted up, blowing air into his lungs. She then remembered she was supposed to start with the heart compressions. All in all, it took 2 rounds of those and 2 more breaths of air before the man started coughing and gasping for air on his own. He spat water out, and Mercy tilted his head sideways before she heaved and pulled to roll the larger man over on his side so he wouldn't choke on it again. She gathered his limbs and got him in the recovery position. "What a mess," she mumbled as she stood up. Jacoby was staring straight ahead in utter confusion and pain, no doubt. His pale hair was plastered to his forehead, his tanned skin slick from the water that Ryder could conjure with such ease. How was she going to get the cops to overlook this anomaly? Mercy stepped over Jacoby so he couldn't see her properly. He seemed dazed and scared, but she couldn't take a chance on him identifying her later. She glanced at the kitchen sink then and rolled her eyes. It would have to do. If they were lucky, Jacoby wouldn't remember the details of his near drowning on dry land all that well. If he thought Ryder had used the sink? Well, that was the only logical explanation, wasn't it? Mercy stuffed the plug in and turned the water on before she walked around Jacoby. "Wait," he gasped as she reached the door. She stopped but didn't turn. The hood shaded her face somewhat, but she wasn't risking it. "You saved me?" he asked. Mercy hesitated for a moment. Did he remember? That could cause all kinds of problems, but no, she decided. It had to be the position he was in. He hadn't put himself in it. Instead of answering him, she walked on and then sped up as she exited the kitchen. Ryder couldn't have gotten far, and the exit he sought was close too. There was no one else between them now. Mercy jumped more than ran down the last few stairs, too driven to even listen for whether or not the cops were following. Jacoby wouldn't be, and Jones would have to tend to him anyway. The double front doors were open, and Mercy barged through them. Although not dark inside, The bright light outside blinded her for a moment, and she had to stop to get her bearings. Her breathing came ragged and fast as she scanned the open courtyard. And there, heading for the cars for some reason, she saw Ryder running in a wild panic, hands to his injured head and face. Officer Badal, who'd been standing near the dead body, glanced up as he became aware of the sound of the running man. He stood halfway with his back to him and never saw the ball of water coming. Despite the cuts to his face, Ryder still had good aim as he flung his innate weapon toward the other man. Water splashed in an explosion around his upper body as Badal was flung a few feet to the side at the impact. Mercy didn't see the man get up again, nor did she worry about it at the moment. She would know if he was dead. She pushed on, arms pumping as her eyes were set on nothing but Ryder. He was staring a moment too long at the police officer, and when he became aware of her, he half turned and cried out in shock. He tried running, but the day was finally taking its toll on him, so much so that he backed up with his hands in a defensive manner in front of him instead. Mercy didn't care. She ran, jumped, and jabbed her fist into his face on her way down. Ryder was too slow to react now. He gasped and stumbled backward, making it easy for Mercy, who pivoted and sent him crashing to the ground as her foot connected with his side. "Please," he pleaded as he coughed and tried crawling away from her. She noted his raised hand, but he couldn't focus enough to compress the water. It trickled from his hand as he moved like a wretch on the ground. "Please," he repeated. "Please what?" Mercy walked right behind him, no hurry in her steps now. "Please don't hurt you like you hurt everyone else. Please. I am so tired of people like you, Ryder. You cause trouble, thinking you're so strong and in control, and then you flee like a coward the moment you have to face the consequences." "Mercy!" he gasped as he reached the patrol car and managed to halfway drag himself up along the hood. Blood trickled from several small cuts on his face and scalp, and he left a bloody handprint in the middle of a large white P on the car. "What? Are you asking for me? Or to get it from me?" she snapped. Ryder was too confused to get it. Again he tried conjuring the water, and yet again it merely trickled from his shaking hand, blood mixing into it, pink drops falling on the hood. Mercy was swift then as she went for him. A well-placed knee to his gut had him gasping until she choked it back down his throat, her hand gripping hard on it. "And to think Lenore and Anselm are gone because of the likes of you." She couldn't keep the contempt from her voice. "Who?" Ryder squeaked. "The Menders? I didn't touch them." "No, but assholes just like you did." "Mercy?" She tightened her grip more, effectively stopping Ryder from talking. "You had your chance in there. Instead, you murdered a man and then tried to kill more." "Mercy, I've damn well had it." She focused on Ryder's face and could see the fear in his eyes as he knew what she was about to do. "Meteor and severely agonizing," she whispered, and she knew he remembered what she'd done to the lamp inside. "Mercy!" "What?" she yelled and turned her head to see Jack standing next to them, cuffed hands in front of him. He must have done some acrobatics to achieve that. How had he gotten out of the car? "Mercy, stop it!" "He has to be dealt with, kid. Stay out of it." "Not this way. The mind lock." "The mind lock? In what reality are you living? The cops are after him. He tried to kill one of them. They'll never let him be." Jack shifted from one foot to the other, and Mercy turned her attention back to the man on the hood. He was leaning back fully now as she pressed over him, allowing him no more than the bare minimum of air. "Wait, no!" Jack's shout came out frantic, and he raised his cuffed hands, fingers spread. "Let them have him then. He'll go to prison. He won't be our problem any longer." "You haven't been paying attention, have you? He can't keep it secret. He's a threat to all of us. Come on, Mercy. Look at him. He's terrified of you." She did. Ryder was worn out, sweating, shivering, and bleeding, his eyes wide and shocked. He wasn't even trying to fight back anymore, only waited for her to use her ability on him. Who do you think he's more afraid of? You or the cops? What did you think this job entailed, kid? She asked him without looking at him. We do the dirty work so everyone stays hidden, so they stay safe. And I get that, Jack countered. When there truly is no other option, I'll be right there with you. You can think what you want of me, but I didn't sign up to do this. I thought we were supposed to help our kind, to make things a little better. Isn't that the point? She saw him turn back and forth a little out of the corner of her eye. Damn it. We don't have a lot of time. No, we don't, she agreed. Mercy, listen. He can go with the cops, or he can face you. It's his choice. Ryder attempted to say something, but Mercy increased the pressure, and instead his eyes bulged a little. He didn't kill your friends. I bet you can't even sense his death now. Mercy gave Jack a side eye that would have made someone like Ryder piss himself, but the young man stood his ground. They hadn't just been her friends. They'd been family. He's our kind, too. Damn it, kid, Mercy snapped and let go of Ryder as she stepped back. The bleeding man sank down on the ground, wheezing and coughing. Thanks, Jack said, and then looked down at the wretch at Mercy's feet with a stern look on his face. If you breathe a word about us, our kind, or abilities to anyone, then I will not stand in her way again. Do you understand? Ryder was barely keeping it together, but he managed a short, shivering nod. That also means you won't use your own ability in front of anyone. Understood? Another nod, more gasping. Wait here for the cops, Jack added, and then walked toward Mercy. Come on, let's get out of here. Mercy stopped him with a hand flat on his chest, the cuff still around her wrist glinting in the light. No, you need to get back in that car. What? I just got out of it. You want to do this job? You can't be a wanted criminal. Jack groaned and suddenly seemed way younger than the man who'd saved Ryder's life a moment ago. But they will not have a case. Trust me. Jack looked to the ground and then nodded. Fine. How'd you get out, by the way? Same way I killed the cameras. Jack smiled and walked over to the gray sedan that belonged to Detective Jones. He put his hands on the side of it and closed his eyes a second. Mercy felt something akin to a small tremor in the air but saw nothing. Some call it electrokinesis, but it's really an offshoot of that. He stepped back and nodded to himself. That should confuse them for a while. How so? EMP. I didn't overdo it, but the car should be as good as dead for a few hours. The same goes for the dash cam. He nodded toward the little camera in the patrol car. Mercy silently berated herself for that slip. It would have caught everything, if not for Jack. And who'd have thought you could actually be handy? She said, feeling her rage cool down at the sight of him strutting around while causing nuisance for the police. Handy? It enabled me to stop you from exploding a man. Mercy gave a soft scoff and smiled as she shook her head. Get in the car. With a last look at Ryder's defeated form, she made a run for it. As she crossed the courtyard at a sprint, she heard the car door slam as Jack did as told. Moments later, she hid well out of sight and saw Jones and Jacoby exit the building. The latter was leaning on the detective as they both were welcomed by the unexpected chaos. Mercy finally sat down then and took a breath as she destroyed the cuffs around her wrists. Then she heard sirens nearing the area as well. The rest was up to Jack and Ryder now. Chapter 10. It was late and had been dark for hours by the time Mercy saw Jack and Mr. Hudson walk down the steps in front of the large concrete building that was the headquarters of the 2nd Precinct. Mr. Hudson noticed her first as he knew she'd be there. The two men waited for a lone car to pass and then crossed the street. So? She prompted as they reached her. As you said, Mercy. Mr. Hudson adjusted his tie and glanced at his watch. They didn't really have a case. There is no way that the laws of nature would allow, at least, where Mr. Maddock here could have pushed Mr. Deemer out of a 12-story window and then be on the ground such a short time later." He gave an unabashed smirk at that. Mercy nodded. She had expected this. Besides, Ryder ought to be confessing to his crimes, with certain small details changed, of course. And Ryder? "He has done as instructed and understands there will be consequences should he lose control and reveal himself to an outsider in such a brutal manner again." "Good. Thank you, Mr. Hudson." The man nodded and then excused himself. Though he had some experience in criminal cases, he didn't actually practice criminal law these days. Still, he was one of them, and helped out in certain cases. "So, you got me a lawyer, huh?" Jack said as Mr. Hudson disappeared around the corner of the city morgue which loomed behind them. "The community got you a lawyer, kid. We look out for our people." "Yeah," he said, and followed suit as Mercy began walking. "I'm beginning to see that. Never had such a good one before." "I bet you didn't." "You look different," Jack added as an afterthought. "That's the point." Mercy couldn't very well hang around the police station wearing the same attire as before, so she wore jeans, a white shirt, and a light jacket, her thick hair gathered in a ponytail. "I didn't want your friend, Detective Jones, spotting me should she walk outside while I waited." "She's not my friend." The indignation in Jack's voice was palpable, and Mercy chuckled. "Well, despite her relentless hunt for me, at least she hasn't got so much tunnel vision that she kept you in there. She's not the worst of them." "That's something." Jack was about to say something, but Mercy pointed at a nearby tram that was about to leave its stop, and they boarded quickly. Surrounded by people, they couldn't talk much about the day's happenings. They simply watched as the apartment buildings of the Harrow district passed them by. The city seemed to have quieted after the fire and the incessant sirens of the day. Mercy and Jack got off near Central Bridge, the largest of the 3 bridges that crossed the river and connected the north and south side of it. Mercy had thought to cross there, but there was an unusual amount of traffic on the bridge for this time of day. It seemed to be standing still. "I trust that Ryder is able to stick to the story?" she asked Jack as they walked closer. "Yeah, so far so good. For him, life in prison is better than no life. I'm out here so he hasn't mentioned me or you by name or the weird stuff, and the second security guard doesn't remember anything." "Good." There was a crowd gathered out there on the bridge as well, but it was too dark for them to see what was going on at such a distance, despite the lights on the bridge and from the cars. "Anyway," Jack went on, uncertainty marking his voice, "I'm sorry I questioned you in front of the guy. It's only that—" "It's fine, kid. You were right." "I was? I mean, of course I was. Always am." "Right." She scoffed and then stopped as they reached the entrance to the bridge. "Look, you might not have been doing things the best way in life so far, but Frank gave you a chance, and so far you've been doing well, Jack." "I have?" Mercy shrugged. "Well, you messed up by getting arrested, but we've all done that. Every single one of us." "You got arrested?" "Of course not. That's your special little cock-up. I meant messed up in some form." "Oh, well then." She could see him trying to suppress a smile of relief. "Must mean I'm growing on you, though," he added. "Really? How so?" "You used my name." "Don't get used to it," she said, and was about to walk onto the bridge when she felt a faint prickling at the nape of her neck. She froze as she glanced around, but nothing seemed amiss in her immediate vicinity. "What's wrong?" Jack asked. "Is it another one of those death warnings? It's not me, is it?" She sensed he was joking, but she couldn't react to that. The sensations spread into her head as the sounds of the crowd out on the bridge rose to screams and shouting. The unintelligible words reached them there on land. "No, it's faint. Too far away to be either of us. Just close enough for me to notice." Jack turned toward the bridge and she saw him shiver as the sensation left her. Oddly enough, though, the connection wasn't broken this time, more drawn out before it vanished. It felt like the Reaper must have lingered. That was odd. This happens too often out on that bridge, Jack said. They should do something about it. Mercy nodded and then steered him away from the bridge. Let's cross further up. There wasn't anything they could do anyway, and it was hardly likely the same thing would happen on Mayor's Bridge on the same night. Where are we going? To do a job. Together? Yep. I thought that wasn't how it was done. That's what I tried telling the judge. Frank seems to be seeing the world from a different angle lately. They crossed the street at a green light and then walked on along the river, a soothing wind carrying through the city that night. Listen, kid. I've been saved by a cop today. Hell, I even saved a cop, and you of all people saved someone from me. I think how things are done are changing a bit. Really? Only a little. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Nah. It wasn't how it was supposed to be done, but who cared about that anymore? Her friends were dead, and they had done everything as they should, just as she did. No, it was time for something new now. That much was clear to her. If that meant giving Jack a hand and, in so doing, helping those he would eventually help, then that was good enough for her. So, what's the job? A better one than earlier today, kid. We're going to give a girl her mother's locket back. And you're back to not using my name then? Of course. Don't expect the world to turn too fast. The end. Want to know what happened on that bridge? Read on or listen to find out in Deadly Awakening, the first book in the Ashdale Reaper series. This has been Touched by Death, an Ashdale prequel novella. Written by G.K. Lund. Copyright 2019 by G.K. Lund. Audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.